The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Robert Harrison sipped his coffee, gazing out at the fields that had been in his family for 3 generations. The 10 acres of fertile land had survived drought, economic downturns, and even the suburban sprawl that now pressed against its borders. What it couldn't survive, apparently, was a clipboard-wielding man in khakis marching up his gravel driveway. Robert squinted through the glass. The man was tall, thin, with the officious air of someone who enjoyed enforcing rules others found trivial. Behind him idled 2 bulldozers, their yellow paint gleaming menacingly in the morning light. "Can I help you?" Robert called out, stepping onto his porch. The heavy wooden door slammed behind him with a finality that would later seem prophetic. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Terrence Blackwood, president of the Suncrest Meadows Homeowners Association." The man extended a hand that Robert deliberately ignored. "I'm here about the multiple violations on your property." Robert crossed his arms. At 62, he'd spent decades working this land, his weathered face and callous hands testament to years under the open sky. "There must be some mistake. My farm isn't part of any association." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. The recent rezoning ordinance brought your parcel under our jurisdiction. These," he gestured with undisguised disgust at the chicken coop and vegetable gardens, "are clear violations of our community standards." "This is absurd." Robert felt heat rising in his chest. "My family has farmed here since 1952. That's long before your fancy development even existed." Nevertheless, Blackwood consulted his clipboard. "Section 17 of our bylaws explicitly prohibits livestock, visible gardening structures, and," he paused dramatically, "unsightly farm equipment. We sent you 3 notices." "I've never received any notices," Robert protested, his voice rising. "And I never agreed to join your HOA. You can't just." "Actually, we can." Blackwood snapped his clipboard shut. "The paperwork was filed with the county last month, and as you failed to remedy these violations after multiple notifications, we're authorized to take corrective action." He gestured to the bulldozers, whose operators were now climbing into their cabs. The blood drained from Robert's face. "You wouldn't dare." "We have a responsibility to maintain property values, Mr. Harrison." Your Blackwood's lips curled. "Hobby farm is decreasing neighboring home values by an estimated 15%. Robert stumbled down the porch steps. "This is my livelihood. My heritage. You can't just destroy it." But the engines were already roaring to life. Robert watched in horror as the first bulldozer lurched toward his prized heirloom tomato garden, the carefully tended plants no match for steel treads. "Stop," he shouted, running toward the machine. "This is illegal. I'll call the police." "They're already aware of our enforcement action today," Blackwood replied smoothly, stepping back to avoid the dust cloud rising from the destruction. "Everything is perfectly above board." Robert fell to his knees as the chicken coop was reduced to splinters, his hands scattering in panic. The fruit trees his grandfather had planted, the irrigation system he'd installed himself, the greenhouse where he grew starter plants to sell at the farmer's market, all of it systematically destroyed before his eyes. By noon, what had been a thriving small farm was a wasteland of mud and debris. Robert stood in the middle of it all, shell-shocked and silent. "You'll receive an invoice for today's remediation," Blackwood said, climbing into his luxury SUV. "I'd suggest prompt payment to avoid further penalties. Welcome to Suncrest Meadows, Mr. Harrison." As the convoy departed, Robert's neighbor Emma Chen rushed over from her adjacent property, her face pale with shock. "Robert, I just got home. What happened?" she gasped. "They destroyed everything," he whispered, his voice hollow. "They said I'm part of their HOA now, that I violated rules I never agreed to follow." Emma shook her head fiercely. "That's not right. My cousin's a lawyer. This can't be legal." Robert looked down at his soil-stained hands, then across at the ruined landscape that represented his past and his future. In his pocket, his phone began to ring, his daughter calling from college, unaware that her tuition money for next semester had just been bulldozed into the ground. "Legal or not," he said quietly, a determined edge hardening his voice, "they picked the wrong farmer to mess with." 2 days after the devastation, Robert sat at his kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. Land deeds, property surveys, tax records, and a growing stack of legal printouts covered every inch of the wooden surface. Outside, the ruined remains of his farm sat under a gentle spring rain that once would have been welcome nourishment for his crops. "Dad, this is outrageous," his daughter Lily said, pacing the small kitchen. She'd driven home from college immediately after his call, her semester finals abandoned in the wake of the family crisis. "How can they possibly claim jurisdiction over our land? We're not even connected to their development." Robert rubbed his eyes. According to Emma's cousin Marcus, who, thank God, is willing to represent us pro bono, they're using some obscure clause in the county rezoning that happened last year. He tapped a highlighted paragraph on one of the documents, but he says they've overstepped badly. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Robert opened it to find a courier holding an envelope. "Robert Harrison?" the young man asked. "That's me. This is for you, sir." He handed over the envelope and departed quickly, as if sensing the tension radiating from the farmhouse. Robert tore it open and scanned the contents, his face darkening. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "It's an invoice for $28,450 for property remediation services and a fine for willful non-compliance with HOA regulations." Lily snatched the paper from his hands, her eyes widening. "They destroy your livelihood and then bill you for it. This is criminal." The phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, Emma's cousin. "Robert, I've been looking into this situation," the attorney said without preamble, "and I found something interesting. The rezoning ordinance they're citing, it specifically exempts agricultural properties over 5 acres from involuntary inclusion in any homeowners association." Hope flickered in Robert's chest for the first time in days. "My property is 10 acres. Exactly, and it gets better. I pulled the county records of their notices, the ones they claim to have sent you. The certified mail receipts have forged signatures, not even good ones." Robert's hand tightened on the phone. "So they lied." "They did more than lie," Marcus replied. "They committed mail fraud, destroyed private property without legal authority, and violated at least 3 state agricultural protection statutes." "You have a solid case, Robert." After hanging up, Robert explained the developments to Lily. Her eyes lit up, but Robert remained cautious. "This is just the beginning of a fight," he warned. "These HOA types have deep pockets and connections. Blackwood drives a $100,000 car. They'll have corporate attorneys. But we have the truth," Lily insisted. "And the law." The next morning brought another unwelcome visitor. A woman in her 40s with a stylish bob and expensive sunglasses knocked on the door. When Robert answered, she thrust out her hand with practiced charm. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Diane Reynolds, realtor with Pinnacle Properties. I represent a developer who's very interested in your parcel. Given the recent, unfortunate circumstances, I thought you might be open to considering an offer." Robert's eyes narrowed. "How did you hear about what happened?" The woman's smile didn't falter. "Small community. News travels. My client is prepared to offer you $750,000. Cash. It would allow you to retire comfortably, perhaps move somewhere more accommodating to your lifestyle." "You mean somewhere I can actually use my own land the way I want to?" Robert replied coldly. "Interesting timing, Ms. Reynolds. Almost as if someone knew I'd be desperate to sell after my farm was destroyed." Her smile tightened. "It's simply a business opportunity, Mr. Harrison. I suggest you consider it carefully. The offer expires in 48 hours. After she left, Robert called Marcus immediately. The lawyer's response was grim. "This confirms my suspicion. The HOA is working with developers. They want your land for expansion, and they're using the association as a weapon to force you out." "But why not just offer to buy it in the first place?" Lily asked when Robert relayed the conversation. "Because," Robert said slowly, realization dawning, "they'd have had to pay market value for prime agricultural land. By devaluing it first, making it unusable for farming, they can swoop in with a lowball offer that seems generous given the circumstances they created." Robert's kitchen had never been so crowded. 5 neighbors, plus Emma, Lily, and Marcus, gathered around the table where a detailed map of the county lay spread out, marked with red circles. "It started 2 years ago," said Jim Thorpe, a retired postal worker who owned 3 acres adjacent to Suncrest Meadows. "My son's workshop was demolished while we were on vacation. Same story. Claimed we were suddenly part of their HOA, said they'd sent notices we never received. They took my greenhouse," added Maria Diaz, a florist who grew specialty blooms on her small property. "Said it violated height restrictions. When I fought back, they filed liens against my property for unpaid HOA dues I never owed." Marcus nodded grimly, taking notes. "And you, Darlene?" Darlene Washington, an elderly woman who'd lived in her modest home for 40 years, dabbed at her eyes. "They claimed my property wasn't aesthetically consistent with community standards. Fined me thousands I couldn't pay. I had to sell to one of their approved buyers for half what it was worth." Robert pointed to the map. "Look at the pattern. They're systematically targeting properties around the perimeter of Suncrest Meadows, creating a perfect rectangle for their expansion." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "And they're using the HOA as a weapon because fighting them individually is expensive and time-consuming. Most people just give up. Not this time." Robert's voice was steel. "We're fighting back together." The next day, Robert received a certified letter from Blackwood and Associates, the legal firm representing Suncrest Meadows HOA. The letter threatened legal action if Robert didn't pay the remediation costs within 7 days. "They're trying to intimidate us," Marcus said when Robert called him. "Standard tactic." Meanwhile, I filed our initial complaint with the court and submitted emergency motions to prevent any further action against your property." Robert had barely hung up when his doorbell rang again. He opened it to find Terrence Blackwood, accompanied by two men in suits. "Mr. Harrison," Blackwood said smoothly, "I believe you've been ignoring our communications. This is Mr. Peterson from our legal team and Mr. Collins from County Code Enforcement." Robert crossed his arms. "I'm not ignoring anything. My attorney has responded to all your communications." "Yes, well," Blackwood looked displeased. "We're here because we've received reports of potential code violations following our remediation efforts. Mr. Collins needs to inspect the property." "You mean the mud pit you created when you illegally bulldozed my farm?" Robert asked incredulously. "The one you're trying to charge me $28,000 for?" Collins, a middle-aged man with an uncomfortable expression, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm just here to be used as another pawn in their game." Robert interrupted. "I understand. You're welcome to inspect, but I'd like my attorney present, and I'll be documenting everything." Blackwood's smile faltered. "That won't be necessary. We can reschedule." "No, please," Robert insisted, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling him now, and I'll get my camera. I'm sure the county would be interested in documentation of the damage caused by an HOA acting outside its jurisdiction." The men retreated hastily, but as they walked to their car, Robert overheard Peterson whispering to Blackwood, "We need to move faster. Reynolds says the investors are getting nervous." That evening, during an impromptu strategy session in Robert's kitchen, Marcus unveiled their legal approach. "We're filing a class action lawsuit," he announced. All 7 affected property owners together. The charges include fraud, mail tampering, property destruction, conspiracy, and violation of agricultural protection statutes. "Can we win?" Maria asked quietly. "Their entire scheme relies on intimidation and operating in the shadows," Marcus replied. "They expected each of you to fight alone, or more likely to give up. They never anticipated organized resistance with documented evidence." "There's more," Emma added, sliding a folder across the table. "I work at the county records office, remember? I pulled the incorporation documents for Suncrest Meadows HOA. Guess who's listed as the primary financial backer?" Robert opened the folder and stared at the name. "Pinnacle Development Corporation. The same company that sent the realtor to make you an offer," Emma confirmed. "And this is Sandra Chen reporting live from what remains of the Harrison family farm, where allegations of corporate fraud, property destruction, and abuse of homeowners association powers have shocked the local community." The Channel 8 news crew had arrived at dawn, setting up equipment as the morning light illuminated the muddy wasteland that had once been Robert's livelihood. Robert stood beside the reporter, his weathered face solemn as cameras captured the destruction behind him. "Mr. Harrison, can you tell our viewers what happened here?" Sandra asked, extending the microphone. Robert cleared his throat. 3 days ago, men claiming to represent Suncrest Meadows HOA arrived with bulldozers and destroyed my farm, crops, equipment, structures, everything. They claimed I was in violation of their bylaws, even though my property is legally exempt from their jurisdiction, and I never agreed to join their association. The camera panned across the devastation as Robert continued, and I've since discovered I'm not alone. At least 6 other property owners in this area have been targeted with similar tactics. By noon, the story had gone viral. Local social media exploded with outrage, and by evening, state news networks had picked up the coverage. The hashtag FarmNoveHOA was trending, with thousands sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. The next morning, Robert awoke to find a crowd gathered at the end of his driveway. Neighbors from miles around had brought homemade signs. "Farmers' rights, stop pure POR80 land grabs, hands off our homes." "Dad," Lily called, staring at her laptop screen. "You need to see this." Robert peered over her shoulder at a hastily issued press release from Suncrest Meadows HOA. Asterisk, "We are deeply concerned by recent misleading reports regarding our community enhancement efforts. All actions taken were in accordance with county regulations and proper notices were issued. Suncrest Meadows remains committed to maintaining the aesthetic and property values that our residents expect and deserve. We categorically deny any improper coordination with development interests." Asterisk. "They're scrambling," Marcus said, arriving with a stack of legal documents. "And it gets better. The judge granted our emergency injunction. They can't take any further action against any of the plaintiff's properties while the case is pending." Robert nodded, relief washing over him. "What about the threats, the text messages?" "Police are investigating," Marcus replied. "And I've subpoenaed phone records. If they came from anyone connected to Blackwood or Pinnacle Development, it strengthens our case considerably." That afternoon, residents of Suncrest Meadows itself began reaching out. Several contacted Robert anonymously, sharing stories of excessive fines, arbitrary rule changes, and intimidation within the development. Most of them are afraid to speak publicly. Robert explained to the growing group of supporters gathered in his kitchen that HOA has liens on their homes. They're willing to provide sworn statements about the Blackwoods' tactics. We need to organize a community meeting, suggested Emma, not just for those of us directly affected, but for everyone in the county. This is about more than our properties. It's about corporations using quasi-governmental powers to bully ordinary citizens. As plans for the meeting took shape, an unexpected visitor arrived at Robert's door, Claire Donovan, a member of the county council. "Mr. Harrison," she said, looking uncomfortable, "I felt I should speak with you directly. The council is concerned about these allegations." Robert invited her inside, where Lily and Marcus were working on legal filings. Riverside Cafe was nearly empty at 7 a.m. Robert sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of black coffee, scanning every person who entered. After 20 minutes of waiting, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking lot. Lou Sadin." Cautiously, Robert paid for his coffee and walked outside. A nondescript blue car sat idly in the far corner of the lot. As he approached, the passenger window lowered. "Get in quickly," said the man behind the wheel, thin, balding, with nervous eyes, constantly checking the mirrors. "I think I was followed." Robert hesitated only briefly before sliding into the passenger seat. "David Walsh, I presume." "Drive and talk," Robert suggested as Walsh pulled out of the parking lot. "What's this evidence you mentioned?" Walsh handed him a USB drive. "Everything's on here. Financial records showing how Pinnacle Development has been channeling money through shell companies to the HOA. Emails between Terrence and Gregory Blackwood discussing their strategy to force out landowners like you." "Why are you doing this?" Robert asked, pocketing the drive. Walsh's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I was fine preparing tax documents and managing accounts. But when they started discussing how to handle people who wouldn't sell, it crossed a line. They fired me when I objected." "What do you mean, handle?" "The threatening text you received? That's just the beginning. There was talk about cutting water lines, damaging foundations, even arranging accidents." Walsh's voice shook. "I have a recorded conversation where Gregory Blackwood specifically says, if Harrison won't take the hint, we'll have to be more persuasive." Robert felt cold despite the warm spring morning. "And what's happening at today's emergency board meeting?" "They're voting to use the HOA's legal fund, nearly $2 million, to countersue everyone involved in your class action. They're planning to bury you in legal fees, drag out for years." Walsh made a sharp turn onto a side street. "But that's not all. They've accelerated the development timeline. Construction equipment is being moved into position today. They're planning to start building on the affected properties immediately, creating a fait accompli that would be harder for a court to undo." "That's insane," Robert protested. "We have an injunction, which only prevents further HOA actions. Pinnacle Development is technically a separate entity. It's a loophole they're exploiting." Walsh pulled the car to a stop. "I've told you everything I know. The rest is on the drive. I'm leaving town today. I suggest you make copies of that information immediately." As Robert reached for the door handle, Walsh added one more thing. "Check the section labeled Project Phoenix. It's their contingency plan if legal action fails. Trust me, you'll want to see it." By 9 a.m., Robert had gathered his allies in Emma's home office, where they crowded around her computer as she opened the files from Walsh's drive. "My God," Marcus breathed as spreadsheets, emails, and voice recordings appeared on screen. "This is a prosecutor's dream. Wire fraud, conspiracy, misappropriation of funds, evidence tampering." "Look at this," Lily pointed to an email chain. Terrence Blackwood specifically identified Dad's farm as the cornerstone property that they needed to secure for the development to proceed. They targeted him first because his land is central to their planned luxury condos. Emma opened a folder labeled Project Phoenix and gasped. Architectural renderings showed a massive complex spanning all their properties with a central feature labeled Blackwood Tower rising 20 stories above what was currently Robert's farmhouse. "The projected revenue is over $400 million, Jim noted, pointing to a financial summary. "No wonder they're playing hardball. We need to get this to the authorities immediately," Marcus said, already copying files. "And to the media. And we need to stop those construction crews," Robert added urgently, explaining what Walsh had told him about the accelerated timeline.